Thank you so much, Claudia. I really appreciate the introduction. After something like that, I'm always tempted just to say thank you and just leave, because it's downhill from there, I'm afraid. That was very nice, thank you. I'll be reading some poems from my first book called Memoirs of an Alias. The first poem is called Story. One summer night, a stranger threw an artificial leg onto my lawn, made of plastic, leather, steel. The garbage man left it there. Sunday, my neighbor put on a yard sale. He rang my bell and swore, "Christ, you got to get rid of that thing, because people think I'm trying to sell it. I'm losing business." All our yards are jammed together. My other neighbor grows a garden in hers and throws a tattered trench coat and fedora over the for sale sign in my yard to frighten off birds. I haven't received mail in weeks. Last night, I carried the leg to the lake and threw it into the dark blue sheets of water, where it thrashed as if waking from a terrible dream. That's almost a true story. I was walking along the street and I did see an artificial leg by the side of the road. And a part of me wanted to take it home. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with an artificial leg? And what if somebody else needs it and they come back for it? So I left it where it was and just wrote the poem instead. This poem is called The Spoon. He picked up the spoon. "What are you doing?" the spoon asked. "I'm about to eat lunch," he said. "But I'll drown if you put me into the soup." "You won't drown," he said. "You're a spoon." "I'll drown," the spoon said. He put the spoon in the soup and held it there for a long time. The handle twitched. Little bubbles appeared on the surface of the soup. He was afraid to lift the spoon up, afraid to put it inside his mouth. The soup grew colder and colder. That's not a true story, thank God. Although I'm sure it's happened to somebody somewhere. Evening postscript. The taxi rumbles in the empty street like a straw at the bottom of a glass. A moment later, everything is quiet. The dead have called us here to make an important announcement, and all the grass leans in one direction, like microphones during a press conference. The stores are closed, but the earth is open. Our shadows pass through it, the grassy turnstiles. And the spider in her web wakes up twitching, like a small dark glove when the hand enters. Dark jars. There is a place where doctors remove people's shadows from their bodies for free. A friend of mine went there. I never saw him again, but he told me about it last night in a dream. The shadows are kept in jars, he said. The jars are so dark, they all look the same, and no one knows whose is whose. This poem is called Life in a Novel. The trouble started when the light bulbs began to burn out in the novel. The author never replaced them. We realized we were on our own and could do whatever we wanted. I was originally just another nobody in an overcrowded paragraph, a stranger with a distant look on his face, carrying a black umbrella, who passes the happy couple in the street. Now I'm the only character left, digging graves in the cold, hard ground with my umbrella. I'm afraid the next person who takes this novel from the shelf will die of shock after seeing what we've done to ourselves. Page from a dream book. I saw a friend of mine who had been dead a long time in a park counting something, and I asked what he was counting. "Numbers," he said, looking at me in a panic. I started to get scared too. Then an old woman walked through the park, feeding the statues. "I hear their stomachs grumbling," she said to us, balancing small white crumbs between their lips. This is a poem that Claudia had mentioned earlier. It's called Hell. Hell is crowded, but you don't notice at first. You're sitting down, and you realize your chair is a person, on their hands and knees, wobbling under your weight. You knock on a door, but it's not a door. It's a person, and you've punched them in the chest. This poem is called Unfurnished Apartment. All the curtains are gone. Moonlight drifts across the floor like a loose Band-Aid. The corners of rooms are angels with walls for wings, wearing halos made by spiders. There are empty clothes hangers hanging in the closet, bobbing gently in place like ducks sleeping on water. And the last poem I'll read from this book is called On Rainy Days. On rainy days, the early mornings resemble evenings, and the middle-aged insect on the ceiling no longer knows what to do with its life. A large, dark crow stumbles uncomfortably across the street, like a right shoe on the left foot. Everything is a little confused, except for the clear-headed raindrops rushing full speed into this one and only world. So I'll move on now to some poems from another collection called Emergency Hallelujah. This poem is called Thrift Shop. A thrift shop in a seedy part of town with drug-addicted mannequins in the window. The rats keep nibbling on their plastic toes. Autumn leaves blow in each time someone opens the door. The discounted nightgowns hover on the rack. They look like souls made of silk, souls shivering in moonlight with easy-to-wash instructions. This isn't my real life, the salesgirl assures me. I stand there nodding my head. It's not my real life either. Outside, over the rooftops, the moon hangs in the sky like a silver medal, as if the world won second prize in a contest. This poem is called Suicidal Toaster. The toaster grew quiet and moody, keeping to itself. Whenever I put bread in it, the toaster popped up too early, as if it didn't care about bread anymore. Something was wrong. It used to love toasting bread. One day I came home to a strange smell. Dark smoke filled the kitchen, and an empty bottle of sleeping pills sat on the counter. I turned the toaster upside down and shook out as many burnt pills as I could, then rushed it to the hospital. The doctor said the toaster was lucky this time. Another few minutes and it would have been too late. I brought the toaster home. Talk to me, I said. Tell me what's wrong, I want to help. But the toaster didn't say anything. When I woke up the next day, the toaster had thrown itself through a window and smashed into pieces on the sidewalk below. It didn't even leave a note behind. Just a few crumbs scattered on the counter, which I keep reading over and over, trying to make sense of it all. This poem is called Talking About the War. As we sat outside after dinner one evening, talking about which colors to paint the rooms of our house, it suddenly seemed we were really talking about the war. The trees rustled, the sky grew dark, and the full moon glowed with a powerless light. We sat outside for a while longer and said nothing at all, and it still seemed we were talking about the war. As a counterbalance to some of the cat poems that arrived earlier, this one's called The Dog Woke Up. The dog woke up and stretched his legs. But I'm not a dog, the dog said. I'm a human being. The dog took a shower, ate some breakfast, and drove to work. Please stop calling me a dog, the dog said. You're giving people the wrong impression. It's not fair. After work, the dog drove home, watched some television, and then prepared dinner. Listen, whoever you are, for the last time, I'm not a dog, the dog said, and looked a little sad. The dog started to cry. But I'm not even crying. This is ridiculous, the dog said, with tears in his eyes. Next door. My next door neighbor is dying next door. He doesn't have the strength to carry his garbage once a week to the curb. He leaves it on the porch and leaves the porch light on. Once a week I carry it for him to the curb with my own. It's almost light enough for me to carry with no hands. How little and light it is. It saddens me 4 times a month to see how little garbage the dying have. I carry it to the curb with no hands. It's almost light enough. The porch light shines through the night until it shuts off. This poem is called Potato. It's a poem that Claudia had referenced earlier. Never in my wildest dreams did I hope to be a person in this life. I didn't even know what a person was until I became one. That's how ignorant I was. I wanted to be a potato, to be honest with you. A hard-working potato with a brilliant future. I'll move on to some newer poems now, some stuff that I'm working on. This poem is called A Strange Time. When my birds went away, I kept stones in cages and gave them names. I painted them beautiful colors and taught them to sleep at night. It was a strange time, but no one complained. When my birds came back, my stones refused to be stones again. I painted the birds gray, removed their wings, and threw them at the windows of abandoned buildings. I kicked them along the road just for fun. The funny thing about that poem is that it inspired someone to write a children's book about birds and stones. I fear for the future. In the suburbs of the Holy City. In the suburbs of the Holy City, clouds drift overhead like 80-year-old ballerinas crossing the street. Teenaged grass blades listen to lawnmower music. Housebroken sunbeams sleep on the floor. The newspaper reports a miracle cure for miracles. At night, the moon's delivery truck unloads fresh light to the day's back door. You can scratch and win the whole world. You can have machine guns as pets, but you can't tell a stone what to do with its life. Warm cigarette butts of bees go from flower to flower, spreading invisible ashes. The earth's dirt keeps rising. Each breath is a momentary life jacket keeping us afloat. Late April. It was late April. The dark lantern of a dog's bark flickered in the yard. The sound of traffic blossomed on the road's crooked black branch. I walked around the city, wondering if the days were getting longer or shorter. The bulky, pumped-up factory smoke seemed as if it had spent all winter working out at the gym. It was late April, and I couldn't tell if the butcher shops were opened or closed. An uncertain wind moved back and forth, fragile as a child's loose tooth. Old Year's Day. There was no New Year this time around because Parliament shut down, so we had to begin the old year again. The same war started over, and the same dead people died twice. We lost our breath inflating burst balloons. We glued all the broken eggshells back together into one big egg. Old empty shoes in the street started kicking us for no reason. A homeless wind pushed a small gray cloud like a wobbly shopping cart through the darkening sky. The watermelon. My wife walked into the kitchen and saw me wiping a large blood stain off the table. What happened, she asked. The watermelon started bleeding when I cut it into pieces, I said. Watermelons don't just bleed for no reason. You must have done something wrong, she said. I didn't do anything wrong. It just started screaming and bleeding as soon as I cut it. Maybe it wasn't a watermelon, she said. I found it in the watermelon section, I explained. Did it look like a watermelon? Not really, I said. It had eyes. It kept watching me. So then why did you cut it into pieces, she asked. Because it was in the watermelon section, I said. After reading that poem at another reading, someone in the audience came up to me afterwards and said it reminded them of the Nuremberg trials, just doing what you're told, even when it's a horrible act. And I thought that was very perceptive of him to realize that, much more perceptive than I had been when writing it. So I do rely on my readers to tell me what the poems are about, so please come up to me afterwards and illuminate me. I look forward to it. War zone. A three-legged wind wobbled through the war zone. The clouds in the sky looked scrawny and underfed. A young girl stumbled around with a pail, gathering gray milk from the statues. The trees no longer recognized their own leaves. Last night, a piece of string attacked us in its dreams. Hotel Dieu Hospital Cafe. We couldn't tell if it was a hospital or a coffee shop. All the linen tablecloths were stained with blood, coffee, and dried up tears. The waitress was dressed like a nurse. She brought us 2 cappuccinos and said we didn't have long to live. Help wanted. An empty store, abandoned for years. Every window smashed, with an old faded help wanted sign still hanging on the door. A crush can, 2 rats, and myself all applied for the job. One of the rats ended up getting it. Tired world, sleep well. Just a couple of more poems. This one's called The Temporary Empire of Today. The ink of early morning shadow lies wet on the pavement's page. A warm sun irons wrinkled clouds as the wind's voice calls through the rustling cell phone of leaves. Bees gather like cars at the flower bed's gas station. Ants wander around like black keys looking for something to lock. And then the day starts to end. And it's suddenly the hour when trees become inward and private. When silence gets its oil changed, and we feel light as a page about to turn. The sky is a puzzle without any pieces, a jukebox of bird songs and church bells. The high-heeled sunlight removes its shoes. The dark straws of grass take little sips of earth. And the final poem is called Tiny Kingdom. The wind chimes resemble a gentle alarm, warning everyone that nothing is wrong. Even though ants creep through the grass like little coffins carrying themselves, and hospitals sneak up behind the sick. Even though the rickety days are kept together only with sunlight sticky tape, everything is fine. The birds in the trees sound like cheerful ambulances. Every moment is a tiny kingdom, and our brief shadows appear permanent as tattoos on the sidewalk skin. Thank you so much. Thanks, guys.